Well, I appreciate Colin's introduction because I was expecting to get boos from an audience like this, being an attorney, because I know all of the attorney jokes that come in a social conservative crowd. But I wanted to start out today by telling you about a case that we just filed last week, a case against a school district here in Pennsylvania, against the Boyertown area school district. My client is a 17-year-old boy who, in changing for gym class, looked behind him and saw a biological female wearing nothing above her waist other than a bra. And he was somewhat shocked, and a number of other members in his gym class were shocked as well, so they went to see an assistant principal, which is a very logical approach to find out what was going on and what could be done. And the assistant principal basically said, hey, this is the way it's going to be, get used to it, and by the way, make it as natural as you possibly can. As if there's anything natural at all about boys and girls changing together in our locker rooms. And you know, you think if you were told, go change together with somebody of the opposite anatomical sex and make it as natural as possible, your immediate reaction would be, hey, wait, that's sexual harassment. And that is precisely what this case is about. This is a sexual harassment case. It's also a case involving our constitutional right to our bodily privacy with regard to someone of the opposite biological sex. We find that all over our case law. We find it all over Pennsylvania statute as well. Now, we know what the catalyst of this was. Last year around this time, President Obama had issued his guidance to public schools saying, you need to open up these private facilities, these bathrooms, locker rooms, showers, overnight shared accommodations to persons of the opposite sex. And if you don't do it, we're going to take away your Title IX funding. Now, thankfully, we have a new president who realized that that was an insane policy and has rescinded that, but it hasn't taken away the underlying problem. It hasn't taken away the underlying problem because now we have a lot of school districts that are left with a level of confusion. And we're trying to help, through this lawsuit, to educate school districts that their obligation, first and foremost, is a constitutional obligation to protect the right of personal privacy. But what has been shoved down our throat from the federal government over the last year, and now we have a reprieve from that, could very well be shoved down our throat from state government. So I'd like to tell you briefly about what proponents call the Fairness Act, what we have referred to as the bathroom bill. It's got language in there that is identical to the language in other states that has been used to open up bathrooms, locker rooms, shower facilities, not only for all kinds of public accommodations, but for public schools as well. And so my warning to the group here is, if we really disliked what the Obama administration did to us last year and are glad for the reprieve that we now have from the Trump administration, let's be sensible and not pass the same kind of legislation here in Pennsylvania that would shove this same thing down our throats. Now, you may be hearing what I'm saying so far and thinking, okay, now I get to spend the next few minutes hearing a social conservative talk about social conservative issues. I'm of more of a libertarian mindset. Well, I'd like to speak to you all of a libertarian mindset. Remember what Ronald Reagan had to say about the three legs of the Republican Party. We're to have a sensible economic policy, we're to have a strong national defense, and we're to care about traditional social values. And that wasn't some throwaway in the 1980s to try to build a larger Republican coalition, nor is it a throwaway today, because if we're not careful about how we handle these are issues that affect our freedom from all of us, and So we need to be careful, and I'd like to lead you through some legislation here in Pennsylvania and to help illustrate why you should care about these issues that you may otherwise just write off as social values issues. So I'd like to go back to this so-called Fairness Act again. I think the name is funny because I think it's not a terribly fair act, but I'd like to start out by talking about some wedding service providers, all of whom consistently get whacked by laws like this, by pretty much identical legislation in other states. Barronelle Stutzman is a florist in Washington State. She has gay and lesbian employees. She has gay and lesbian customers. She had a longtime customer who she really enjoyed working with, enjoyed his creativity, made flowers for his same-sex partner for all kinds of occasions like anniversaries. When same-sex marriage came to Washington State, he asked her to do the flowers for the wedding, and she said, "Oh, Rob, for you I would love to do it, but because of my faith in Jesus Christ, I can't do it." And they talked about the wedding. They talked about other florists who could do a good job for him. They eventually hugged, and he went his way. And you look at that as far as that goes, as, you know, I love that because this is what pluralism in America should look like. People may disagree, but they can still love each other, they can hug, and they can go on, and that's the best of America, except when we have laws that get in the way of that, right? So he talked to his partner posted something on social media went viral, the Attorney General of Washington State read it, and then decided to prosecute Barronelle Stutzman. And the case went from their Human Relations Commission to the state court to appellate court to the Supreme Court of Washington State, and she lost at every stage along the way, as has every wedding service provider when these issues have come up. And you may say, well, I would just do the flowers, I would just bake the cake, what is the big deal? It's the right of conscience. That's the big deal. The big deal isn't what we would choose to do in a similar circumstance. The big deal is what we're going to force other people to do. And it's an issue that's a little bit like freedom of speech, right? Because we may not agree with the speech of another speaker, but we are going to defend their right to speak, because if you can take away their right to speak, my right to speak is going to be gone next. And the same is true for the right of conscience. It's an issue that matters not just to conservatives, but conservatives and liberals, to those who are religious, to those who are not religious, to wedding service providers, and to everybody. Why? Well, let me give you an example from the inaugural events for Trump. You may have read about all of those dressmakers who said, I can't in good conscience make a dress for the new First Lady for the inauguration, and we may look at it and say, you are out of your mind, because who wouldn't want to have their label on the new First Lady? Or the performers who said, oh, I wouldn't be able to perform in the inauguration. It would be like throwing flowers to Hitler. And so we naturally roll our eyes at the comparison and at the vitriol, but we would never for one moment force these people to actually make the dresses or perform in these events, because we understand that there's something deeply important in America, which is we're not going to force people to violate their conscience. Because if we force anybody to violate their most deeply held convictions, there's no stopping what government can do to us. So those of us who love freedom should hate laws that punish people simply because they're trying to live out their beliefs in very mundane ways like this. So we should care about what's happening to the wedding service providers. We should care about the Fairness Act. There's another facet of this that I think we should all be aware of, and it's the hiring provision in the Fairness Act. And how does that affect religious employers like Christian schools? Christian schools very naturally want to hire people who share their mission. In fact, every employer wants to hire people who share their mission. It just so happens that the mission in a Christian school is inculcating religious values. And some of those religious values quite naturally have to do with things like marriage, human sexuality, and gender. And laws like this have, again, been used to punish religious schools. And if you take away the right of religious schools to really be religious, there's not a whole lot that's left to religious schools, right? So we should care about this not because we're looking for some bone to throw to religious groups, but because, again, this is part of a larger freedom issue. Everybody is able to hire based on mission. And we should be. That's what employers should be able to do. And so essentially, we're just singling those out like Christian schools who may have a different view on issues like marriage from what are held by the government. We ought not to punish them and basically force them out of the unique role that they have simply because they are who they are. That's very un-American to take away that freedom. On another issue, you've heard a lot about defunding Planned Parenthood, both on the federal level, and I believe Senator Eichelberger has recently introduced legislation that would deal with funding for abortion groups. And I'd like you to be aware of this, again, from a more libertarian perspective, to say, what in the world are we doing as a government in basically subsidizing abortion providers? That's not the business of government. And you may say, yeah, well, they're getting this for healthcare screenings. Yeah, healthcare screenings, they could be done by other medical providers. They can more holistically give healthcare and provide service better for others than abortion providers. And besides, there's something really bad about creating a loss leader for these abortion providers. You know what it's like. You go to a grocery store and they're offering you the ability to buy Turkey Hill ice cream for $1 a half gallon, and you know they're losing money on it, but it's their ability to get you in the door. Do we really want to be subsidizing something like this for an abortion provider to get people in the door for their big business, which is a bad business? That also, understand this, the Planned Parenthood group of entities gives money to candidates to run for office. Those candidates then turn around to give money to Planned Parenthood. That ought not to be if we care about economic freedom. And I'd finally, in my last minute, talk to you about Senate Bill 3, which changes the legal age of abortion in Pennsylvania from 24 weeks, technically 25 weeks, the way that it works out, to what's technically 21 weeks. And also prohibits dismemberment abortion, basically killing an unborn child in the womb by ripping off its limbs while it's still alive. A society that doesn't care about those who can't speak for themselves is not a free society. We can do better than that in America. And think about the fact that there's only 7 countries in the world that allow abortion past 20 weeks. Countries like China, Vietnam, and North Korea. The United States ought not be part of that list. So in summary, I want you to understand these issues from a freedom perspective, from a how are we going to take care of those who can't speak for themselves perspective, and from the perspective of freedom that is going to affect all of us if we don't rally around those whose freedom is being taken away. Thank you.